Hey mate, 40 here. We're in Royal National Park, about 20 miles outside of Sydney, listening to a podcast here. And the guest is Diana Fleischman, an evolutionary psychologist. She's married to Jeffrey Miller. She's working on a book called How to Train Your Boyfriend. The podcast host is Misha Saul, talking about this concept of stickiness when it comes to sexual relationships. And I think she's absolutely spot on. She's getting this from the Christians.
Like now, even in my late 20s, if I dated somebody and we had a sexual relationship, I would like them, but I wouldn't necessarily fall in love with somebody just because we spent a period of intense time
so
together.
It's propensity to fall in love.
Propensity to fall in love, propensity.
Yeah, stickiness. So I don't know, if I was 22 the first time I had sex, and the intensity of that bond was just incredible. I almost couldn't picture myself being with anyone else but my girlfriend. And so with your first sex partner, the natural, normal person is going to be incredibly tightly bonded to their first sex partner. And then, so I got into my 20s, I had more sex partners. Really, number 2 was the thing that just opened up Pandora's box. So I thought, oh my God, there's just so much beauty and pleasure, and there's so many possibilities out there to taste. And it just sent me off. But even in the first 10, right, I was still falling very deeply and passionately for women that I was intimate with. But once we start getting past 10 into the 20s and 30s, right, don't feel nearly as bonded.
You need to commit, right?
Yeah. Okay, got it.
And that decreases as one gets older.
Got it.
I think
That
that
makes
decreases
sense.
in men and especially among women. So one thing that I think that people don't appreciate is that for many women, not all women, like I know a woman who was having casual sex quite happily when she was 15. She never felt slighted by boys who didn't want to be in a relationship with
Sure,
her.
but on average, I totally
But
get
on
that,
average, women use sex in order to kind of foot in the door technique to try to get into a relationship with men a lot. And they are often disappointed when a man doesn't want to be in a relationship with them. And most women are not profoundly sexually motivated for sexual variety. And some women like it. Most women have no specific desire for it. Most women, if they have a lot of different sexual partners, it's because they're unusual in terms of their libido, or because they're trying to assess their value in the marketplace and see who might want to be in a long-term relationship with them. And men have somewhat different preferences. So I think that what people are not talking about is this propensity to fall in love when one is young, and about how the older you get, the pickier you get. Like in my case, I'm happy that I'm not sticky anymore, right? I'm glad that I can consciously and have chosen somebody who I have really a lot in common with, because I think I would be a difficult mate for somebody who I didn't have a lot in common with. And I'm a very weird person. I'm a very unusual person. So
Yeah, that's true. The older you get, the pickier you get. So I'm 56 now. I'm a lot pickier than when I was 16, 26, or 36.
I don't think that it would have made me happy to settle down with my high school, college boyfriend, who's a lovely guy, and who my...
She earlier described him as being low IQ. He told her that his mother couldn't have any more children because she'd had a lobotomy.
parents definitely wanted me to marry. And if I had married him, I'm sure I would be, I'd be okay. I would just probably not be super nice to him because he bored me oftentimes.
I have to say, your self-awareness, and I've heard on other podcasts as well, is like absolutely glorious. It's one of my favorite things, and I appreciate you sharing that. I think your point really reinforces my original one, in the sense that our culture today says, don't worry about it, take your time, go meet a bunch of folks, and
Yeah, so I could really do without most of Misha Saul's commentary here. And his questions are just so lengthy and ponderous. And then he's always proposing theses that he wants Diana to respond to. Like, come on, just ask a question. Right? Don't propound some lengthy thesis that you then need your guest to respond to.
really, as you note, women probably seem to me on average as well to have a propensity to, that goes against the grain.
Okay, let me
take
fast
your
forward.
point as kind of, or whatever, as as they do in parts of.
Right, so I take your point as supporting my point. Yeah, don't do that as a host. Come on now.
Fewer and fewer men ended up being killed in wars. You know, there were two big wars, obviously, in the last 100 years or 120 years, but there weren't so many as frequent skirmishes, and there weren't so many men who died. So I think that it was important that there was some level of polygyny, or men having multiple partners previous to that, so that all women could be partnered, and so everybody had somebody to kind of look after them. With monogamy, I think that what we saw was definitely like a de facto monogamy. Very, very high status men. We're talking people like royalty and dukes and lords and other people who are well-to-do. It was totally fine for them to have mistresses or concubines and even support those women. And even now, if you look at men who are high status in our society, yes, they tend to marry, but they often divorce their first wife. They marry somebody younger the second time around. And so there's a sort of de facto polygyny that's happening, but it's more socially acceptable because they're taking.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I didn't think of that. But high status men do tend to go through a lot more wives than medium and low status men.
Take care of each of these wives in turn, completely.
And even if they don't, I've noticed that they feel their power. Like the higher status men feel their power. And I remember this one high status man commented something about his wife wasn't happy, and then he said, what is she going to do? How's she going to do any better than me? It's like, yeah, it's like a brutal remark that he made to me, an acquaintance. But he definitely feels like he's wielding the power in the relationship. So I suspect that he gets his way more often than not. Because what is a woman in her early 40s going to do?
Taking care of all the kids that result from that. So yes, in some sense, I think it does that. But people have talked a lot about the problem of incels fairly recently, and it's not a new problem. So as Martin Daly and Margot Wilson were famous evolutionary psychology couple who wrote a whole book called Homicide. The vast majority of men who engage in aggressive behavior or who destroy things or who behave in any kind of antisocial way in society are men who don't have mates.
So I'm out here on a path alone. I don't think there are any human beings for several miles. And like if I was to walk, into a bloke here on this very lonely path, I'd feel much better if I knew he had at least a girlfriend, if not a wife. I mean, when you're out here, there's no one about. I haven't seen anyone on this trail, so I'm about 5 miles into my walk into Royal National Park. It's a cool, rainy day. No one's out here hiking. It's just me alone in Royal National Park. Yeah, I'd much rather know that a bloke, had a woman.
Or who have no way of attaining a mate. That's partly why you're seeing so much difficulty right now. When men lose their ability to make a living, they often also lose their way of attracting a mate. And so these men are basically on the floor when it comes to their potential future reproductive success, and any risk they take becomes more rational as a risk. And so monogamy became, I think, a way of doling out one woman for each man and reducing the problem of men who were going to be just absolutely destructive in society. And I think that it has to some extent it is not so good for elite men, but also if you think about it, it's not so good for women. I think there are many women who would rather share a guy with another woman who's really good than have some man that nobody else wanted.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. I haven't heard that argument before. I don't know if many people find that intuitive that women would be preferred to share a man, but I guess you're talking about the actual counterfactual.
So, talking about some rather unpleasant parts of human nature here that go against the grain of the monogamous ideal of the Jewish and Christian ideals. But once again, I'm afraid she's right.
Because one thing I've noticed, obviously new things,
Okay.
we haven't had real generational turnover in understanding what this actually looks like. So I think we're kind of hypothesizing at this point. I don't know how that kind of turns out and what the implications of that are. How do you think about it?
So I agree with you that yes, our society is increasingly atomized, and children don't necessarily grow up with their grandparents. And I think that problem is being exacerbated. If I'm just going to talk about things from an economic perspective, in the United States, we've made it much easier to buy houses. We have very low financing, and what we really ideally would want is for people to be able to be more agile and to move around more. And I think part of that would make people enabled to go back to maybe where their parents are, if they have children. So I think that that's something that we could incentivize, but we don't incentivize. And in addition to that, when you see grandparents looking after grandchildren, things like that, not only do they take much better care of their grandchildren than than a daycare might, for example.
So I'm thinking about an Asian girlfriend of mine. She grew up like sleeping 3 in a bed with her sisters. And so for me, it's very difficult to sleep in the same bed with someone. Like, I'm really used to my space because I effectively grew up as an only child because my brother and sister are a lot older, 8. My brother's 8.5 years older, my sister's about 11.5 years older. And so I always had my own room pretty much. And so I'm really used to having my own space. And so it'd be really hard for me to compromise and to give that up. But when I do experience more connection with family, it is wonderful.
But also it makes children more incentivized to look after their parents and to have more extended kinds of networks. So I do think that that's
I was very impressed by the Asian students I met at UCLA who considered it a privilege to look after their parents.
problem that people aren't really thinking about. And you especially see this with COVID. I think in East Asia, where people do tend to live in extended family households, there was a lot more mourning about the people who died, whereas in the United States, the majority of people who died were elderly people. And I haven't even seen moments of silence for people who died of COVID here in the US, or people who died in nursing homes. So there's just so many aspects of our society that lend to that. My grandmother, who's now 93, lives in Munich. And in Munich, there are elderly people on the street everywhere you go, doing their shopping, walking their dogs. It's a very pedestrian friendly kind of area. And if you live in big cities where people only drive, you're never going to see elderly people. You can completely forget that they exist. If you've also moved away from your...
So that's a good thing about living in traditional community, right? You see a lot more, old people, young people. You see the whole age mix. So when I go to an Orthodox synagogue, it's not unusual to see 3 generations of a family praying together, eating together.
Parents who might care for others. Another thing, there's a really good David Brooks piece in the Atlantic from a few months ago, which is called "Was a Nuclear Family a Mistake?" and basically talking about how people all live on their own right now. And I got really into watching stuff about tiny houses and people living in vans and stuff during the lockdown. I became obsessed with these kinds of videos, and I was looking at the comments underneath, and people were saying, about a 2-year-old living with her parents, and she had a little bed underneath their bed on top, and they're like, if she hears her parents having sex, it's gonna scar her for life, and these people are really irresponsible. Or people talking about how they need their space. And I think that once people have their own stuff in their own space, it's very difficult for them to come back to an area of communal living and to be happy sharing again. It's much more difficult to backslide into that.
Yeah, once you've tasted your own space, it is hard. It's like once you've tasted sexual variety, particularly as a man, it's very hard to settle down unless you've made that decision that you've reached that time in life where it's time for family and children.
Kind of a context when you get used to the luxury of having your own space. And I never did write a blog about this. Maybe I will at some point. But I think part of it's about affluence. People want their privacy. And when I asked Twitter, what do people mean when they say they want their privacy? Or what are they talking about, having sex or masturbating or pooping or what they're talking about? And I actually do think that this is a difference between Western society and more Eastern society.
So for me, having my own space means more space to write. Writing is a private act. So I love to write and to think. And so some privacy really helps with that.
Is that people want to have privacy in part to eat and poop and to masturbate and do all those things as much as they want to, right? And those are things that are difficult to get used to not having. So if you look at these huge American houses and the distance that people have, where they don't have to talk to anybody who they disagree with or they might have a fraught relationship with, it's very difficult to convince people that no, it's better for society if in fact they move back in with their families. Oftentimes, people have these fraught relationships, and politics, if we're in an election season right now, can only make that worse. If you look at the political sloganing that's going on right now, if you have a mother or father who is pro-Trump or pro-Republican, it's not just that they have a different viewpoint than you, but they're positively evil. And it's almost got like a cult-like quality to it. You know, if you join a cult, or if somebody you know has left the fold, you're supposed to completely unperson them. And I think that there's a lot of unpersoning that's happening right now as well within families and friendships because of the very heated kind of political climate that people who disagree with us are, in fact, evil. So it's a very long and roundabout way of saying I do think it would be better if people lived in more extended family households, if people more often lived with people they were related to. And I think it would be really good if there was some incentive for that. I myself have thought a lot of times, and it may still happen in my life.
So being in Australia, all right, I don't think I've heard a complaint about the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. Right, granted, he's only about 6 months into his term, but politics just doesn't seem to have the same salience or valence, right? Salience means priority and valence refers to emotional intensity. And politics and culture war issues just don't seem to have the same intensity or priority here in Australia. The two major political parties are fairly similar. And don't think it's a great idea when we start cutting people out of our lives because of politics.
Of living in a kind of community environment where people work together and eat together and live together, because it's all too easy to imagine that having a big house all to yourself makes you happy when you're far away from actually knowing all the difficulties and the pleasures of actually living in close proximity with other people. You know, we had a couple living with us during lockdown, and it was really, really good. I think especially for my marriage, being a super extrovert, to have other people to talk to.
So I was asked about what are my highlights from my trip in Australia. Was it when I took this walk or that walk, or when I was here or there? And the highlights of my trip are the time I spent with people, whether in synagogue, someone's home, with my brother, with my sister. So my best memories are with people. They're not at, Mykonos and Santorini, right? These are beautiful Greek islands, but I went there alone, didn't have a lot of social interactions there, and I was just stunned at how the joy and pleasure and meaning I took from the trip to Greece for a week was less than 10% of what I had going to Israel, where I was with a whole crew. So I went on a Jewish Federation singles trip to Israel, and we bonded, we connected, we had that shared experience, we fed off each other's energy. And even though I started that trip, sick, I still managed to get energized